All right, let's do part two of the INTP profile. I'm going to do the top four conscious functions in this presentation, and then the next time we will do the so-called shadow functions of the INTP, and that'll give you all 8 in the stack. So let's start with the dominant function, just dominant in general. And again, hello if you're here and you're not an INTP. Hope you learned something if you are an INTP. Hopefully you'll learn more. But the dominant function in general, for all types. Every type has a dominant function. This is what creates the inferior function. There's a complementary relationship, and every function has 2 dominant types. So the dominant function of the INTP is TI. There are only 2 dominant TI types, the INTP and the ISTP. Extroverts and introverts are defined by the orientation of the dominant function. That's why we're introverts, because our dominant function is introverted, and in the case of the types that represent the dominant types for the extroverted functions, that's why they're extroverts. There's nothing independent about being an extrovert or introversion, independent about being an extrovert or an introvert. It's just a sort of quality of whatever direction your dominant function is pointed. It's the strongest and most developed function of all of our functions, but it also distorts and colors the use of the other 7 functions. All types have all 8 functions. It's the order of the stack that defines your type. It's true that the position of a function is defined by Jungian psychological types as a product of repression, but Jungians have argued about what degree this might be attributable to Freud's influence. And, in other words, is this defined negatively? Is this a habit? Is this an internal struggle? Is this nature? Is this nurture? The classic psychological dilemma applies here too. I'm not going to seek to answer the question of nature-nurture here, because it's a hard problem for psychology. We're all more or less imbalanced in development relative to others within, our type group, and obviously outside by definition. So what defines, obviously, them as being a different type is that they are better than us at the things that we're worse at. But even among INTPs, you can find someone who might have relatively weaker TI than you, or relatively stronger TI than you, more balanced extroverted intuition, more balanced extroverted feeling. And on that point, I would actually, if I were to render a guess, that's mostly probably environmental, why you might see an INTP who's sort of forced to use different functions more often than another INTP, that their functions, their natural functional attitudes weren't valued as much, something like that. But I'm rambling, and this is already going to be longer than the last video. Narrowing in on introverted thinking, to recapitulate, the introverted thinking being the dominant function of the INTP is why you are an introvert. The ISTP is the other and only other introverted thinking dominant type. We TI DOMs have a reputation for stubbornness, kind of like the FI DOMs, but I would say TI DOMs are more likely to use trolling and disingenuousness as a form of expression. These are all stereotypes, which might be a point of demarcation from introverted feeling DOMs, a little bit more trying to express ourselves authentically with authenticity instead of reductio ad absurdum, mental games and other goofy stuff that introverted thinking tends to produce. It's the counterpart to extroverted feeling. It's the complement, which is the inferior function of the INTP, also ISTP. Introverted thinking is also used by the ESTP and the ENTP more as an instrument, and these types tend to take the products of introverted thinking less seriously accordingly. They're more flexible with it, but their introverted thinking itself is less flexible. In other words, our introverted thinking can apply to more things, but we're also more likely to get fixed on its conclusions, and we're less likely to, pick it up and put it down, whereas the ESTP and ENTP types don't get so attached to the products of their introverted thinking. Like its twin in introverted judgment, FI, introverted feeling, it's very concerned with internal and self-consistency, both personally and its judgment of others. So I think that the self-consistency of a person's behavior or justifications or arguments are very important to the IXXP types, the introverted feeling dominant and introverted thinking dominant types. And we also hold ourselves to that standard. We want ourself to be internally and self-consistent. We don't want to be hypocrites ourselves, and we don't particularly appreciate it in other people as well. I've also noticed that introverted thinking and introverted feeling dominant types tend to speak from a first-person point of view and qualify their statements a lot. You'll probably even hear it a lot in my language throughout this presentation because I'm not going to really monitor myself that way. Like extroverted thinking, introverted thinking does consider accuracy to be very important, but it doesn't necessarily develop its ideas for practical reasons. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, which is unlike extroverted thinking. If you want to make a point of demarcation there, introverted thinking cares less about external accomplishment. Positions of authority are not as highly valued, both for the person, for you yourself, and in others. In other words, it's not that important for you to climb the mountain necessarily just because it's there to climb, and it's not important if somebody else climbed the mountain if you don't feel like it's an important mountain to climb. It's not interesting. It doesn't hold as much weight. What matters more is, can you really hit on the specifics and show introverted thinking that you've dug as deeply into the subject as they have. It's not as important what badges are on your shirt. Anybody can sit in a chair. It doesn't prove anything. Let's get on to the second function before this is a million minutes long. This is called the creative function or the auxiliary function.